He only wanted to learn. But one wrong night, in the wrong place, stole his freedom. Now, behind bars, Adrian has only one weapon left, his mind. What happens next will leave you speechless. Adrian never imagined that walking home from the library would change his entire life. At 19 years old, his biggest concern was which language to learn next. Mandarin? Arabic? Maybe Portuguese? His gift was extraordinary. Hearing just a few sentences in any language allowed him to grasp its structure, its rhythm, its soul. Where others saw complexity, Adrian saw patterns. Where others heard noise, he heard music. But gifts don't protect you from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a Tuesday night in March. The street was empty except for the distant sound of traffic. Adrian had his headphones in, listening to a German podcast about cognitive linguistics. He was so absorbed in the explanation of syntactic structures that he didn't notice the police cars screaming past him. He didn't see the officers running into the building across the street. He didn't hear the gunshots. What he did notice was the hand on his shoulder. "Don't move." Adrian turned around slowly, his heart suddenly pounding. Two police officers stood behind him, their faces hard and suspicious. One of them was holding something in a plastic bag, a gun. "Is this yours?" Adrian's mouth went dry. "What?" "No, we found it right there." The officer pointed to a spot near the alley entrance, barely 10 feet from where Adrian stood. "You're the only person on this street." "I just walked by. I was listening to..." Adrian pulled out his phone, hands shaking, trying to show them his podcast app. But the officer grabbed his wrist. "Save it for the station." Everything after that felt like a nightmare moving in slow motion. The handcuffs. The police car. The interrogation room where nobody believed him. The public defender who looked exhausted before the conversation even started. The judge who saw just another young man with no alibi and circumstantial evidence placing him at a crime scene. 6 months. Minimum security. But still prison. Still bars. Still the death of everything Adrian had been building, his university scholarship, his language research, his freedom. But what Adrian didn't know yet was that this nightmare would lead him to discover something about himself that would change everything. The first night in prison, Adrian didn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the concrete ceiling, listening to the sounds of a place that operated on rules he didn't understand. Men shouting in the distance. Metal doors slamming. The constant buzz of fluorescent lights that never fully turned off. He thought about his mother. She had cried in the courtroom, her face buried in her hands. He thought about his little sister, who was too young to understand why her brother couldn't come home. He thought about the library where he spent every afternoon, surrounded by dictionaries and grammar books from around the world. All of it, gone. Around 3 a.m., someone started talking in the cell next to his. Adrian couldn't see the man, but he could hear him clearly through the ventilation system. The voice was deep, tired, speaking in a language Adrian didn't immediately recognize. It had the cadence of something Eastern European, but the vowel sounds were different, softer, almost melodic. Adrian sat up, his linguist's brain automatically engaging. He listened carefully, parsing the sounds, identifying patterns. Within minutes, he recognized it, Romanian. But not standard Romanian. This was a regional dialect, probably from Moldova. Without thinking, Adrian found himself whispering back through the vent in Romanian, "Nu eti singur aici." "You're not alone here." The voice stopped abruptly. Then, after a long pause, "Tu vorbeti romana." "You speak Romanian?" "Puin," Adrian replied. "A little." Which was true. He'd studied Romanian for exactly 17 minutes, just now, by listening. What Adrian didn't realize was that this single conversation would save his life in ways he couldn't imagine. The Romanian man's name was Dimitri. He was 47, serving the last year of a 5-year sentence for fraud. Over the next few days, he and Adrian talked through the ventilation system, about nothing, about everything. Dimitri taught Adrian phrases his textbooks never covered: prison slang, regional idioms, the kind of language you only learn by living. But Dimitri also warned him. You're young. You're educated. People will notice. Some will want to help you. Others. Dimitri's voice trailed off. Others will want to break you. To prove you're not special. Be careful who you trust, Adrian. In here, knowledge is power, but it's also a target. Adrian took the warning seriously. During his first week, he kept his head down. He observed everything. The social hierarchies. The unspoken rules. The way certain inmates commanded respect while others were invisible. He noticed that the guards treated some prisoners with casual indifference and others with barely concealed contempt. And he noticed the languages. The prison was a linguistic ecosystem. Spanish in one corner, Mandarin in another, African dialects he couldn't immediately place, Arabic prayers at dawn, Russian negotiations in the yard. Each language represented a group, a network, a power structure. Adrian realized something that would change his entire strategy. Language wasn't just communication here. It was currency. It was protection. It was survival. But he had no idea how quickly he would need to use it. On his 9th day inside, Adrian witnessed something that would force him to make a choice. He was in the cafeteria, eating the tasteless food in silence, when a fight broke out 3 tables away. It started with shouting in Spanish, accusations about stolen cigarettes, and escalated within seconds to violence. But what caught Adrian's attention wasn't the fight itself. It was the young man sitting alone at the table next to the conflict, frozen in fear, clearly not understanding what was happening. He looked about 16, though he was probably older. His face showed pure terror. Adrian watched as 2 men grabbed the young man, shouting at him in rapid Spanish, accusing him of being involved. The young man tried to respond in broken English. No, I don't. I don't understand. The guards were moving in, but slowly, letting the situation play out. In prison, Adrian had learned, guards sometimes waited to see how things resolved themselves. Without thinking, Adrian stood up and walked toward the commotion. His heart was pounding, his hands sweating, but his voice came out steady. "Él no tiene nada que ver con esto," Adrian said in Spanish. "He's got nothing to do with this." The 2 men turned to look at him, surprised. One of them, heavily tattooed with a scar across his eyebrow, narrowed his eyes. "¿Y tú quién es? And who are you?" "Alguien que habla suficiente español para saber que él no entiende nada de lo que están diciendo." Someone who speaks enough Spanish to know he doesn't understand anything you're saying. There was a moment, a dangerous, crystalline moment, where it could have gone either way. Then the scarred man laughed, a short bark of amusement. "Este niño tiene huevos." This kid has balls. He released the young man and turned back to the original conflict. Crisis averted. Guards arrived, dispersed everyone, and order was restored. But Adrian had just made himself visible. And in prison, visibility cuts both ways. The young man Adrian saved was named Kai. He was 21 but looked younger, serving 18 months for a parole violation. He spoke primarily Hong and broken English. Over the next few days, Kai stayed close to Adrian, grateful but also curious. "How you learn Spanish so fast?" Kai asked one afternoon in the yard. His English was choppy but improving. You been here only. What, 2 weeks? Adrian shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. I just pick up languages easily. Always have. That's not normal, man. Kai looked at him with something between admiration and disbelief. That's like a superpower or something. Adrian had never thought of it that way. To him, language learning was as natural as breathing. He heard patterns where others heard chaos. He saw structures where others saw randomness. But in here, Kai was right, it was a kind of power. Word spread quickly in the confined ecosystem of the prison. Within days, other inmates started approaching Adrian with requests. Could he translate a letter from their family in Tagalog? Could he help them understand what the Arabic-speaking guards were saying? Could he teach them basic phrases in their loved one's language? Adrian said yes to all of it. Not for payment or protection, but because it gave him purpose. It made him feel like himself again, like the person who spent afternoons in the library, lost in the beautiful complexity of human communication. But there was one person watching him who didn't see a helpful translator. He saw a threat. His name was Marcus, and he ran the most influential group inside the prison walls. Marcus had been inside for 8 years. Drug trafficking, assault, a list of charges that kept getting extended every time he came up for parole review. He was 42, built like someone who spent every free hour in the prison gym, and he commanded respect through a carefully balanced combination of charisma and fear. Marcus ran the informal economy, the trade of contraband items, the betting pools, the protection rackets. And central to his power was information control. He had people who spoke Spanish to the Latin American inmates, people who spoke Russian to the Eastern European bloc. Language access was power access, and Marcus controlled the access. Until Adrian. Adrian didn't understand the political implications of what he was doing. He just saw people who needed help and helped them. But each time he translated something for free, each time he bridged a communication gap without asking for anything in return, he was undermining Marcus's carefully constructed system. It took 2 weeks before Marcus made his move. Adrian was in the library, a small room with outdated books and 3 ancient computers, working on a grammar notebook he'd been compiling. He was documenting the different dialects he was hearing, creating a linguistic map of the prison. It was the kind of thing that made him feel like he still had his mind, his gift, his purpose. That's impressive work. Adrian looked up. Marcus stood in the doorway, alone, which was unusual. He usually traveled with at least 2 other men. Just keeping my brain active, Adrian said carefully. Marcus walked closer, looking at the notebook. 7 languages so far. In 3 weeks. That's extraordinary. He sat down across from Adrian, his movements casual but his presence overwhelming. You know what I find interesting? You're helping everyone. Not asking for anything. Not building your own network. Just helping. I don't see why that's a problem. It's not a problem, Marcus said slowly. It's an opportunity. For both of us. What Marcus was about to propose would force Adrian to make an impossible choice. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Adrian with the calculating gaze of someone who had survived years inside by reading people correctly. Here's the situation, he said quietly. You have a gift. A genuine, rare gift. In here, that gift is worth something. To me, to you, to everyone who needs what you can do. But right now, you're giving it away for free, which means you have no protection, no structure, and no future. Someone's going to exploit you, or worse, they're going to resent you for disrupting the balance. Adrian's grip tightened on his pen. I'm not disrupting anything. I'm just, "You're undercutting established systems," Marcus interrupted, but his tone wasn't aggressive. It was almost educational. "Every time you translate something for free, someone who used to charge for that service loses income. Every time you help someone understand what's happening, you're giving them information they used to have to trade for. You're a disruption, whether you mean to be or not." "So what are you saying?" Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm saying work with me. You provide language services through my network. I provide you with protection, resources, and a percentage of the value you generate. You get to keep helping people, you just do it in a way that doesn't destabilize everything." Adrian felt his stomach twist. He understood what was really being offered: become part of Marcus's machine, or become its target. "And if I say no?" Marcus stood up slowly. "Then you're on your own. And being on your own in here." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging in the air like smoke. "Think about it. You have 24 hours. He walked out, leaving Adrian alone with his notebook and a choice that felt impossible. But that night, something happened that would change everything Adrian thought he knew. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He lay in his cell, turning Marcus's proposition over in his mind. Every option felt like a betrayal of himself, of his values, of the reason he'd started helping people in the first place. Around 2 a.m., he heard a sound he'd never heard before in the prison: crying. Not angry shouting or violent outbursts, but genuine, broken sobbing. It was coming from somewhere down the cell block, echoing through the ventilation system. The crying continued for several minutes, then stopped abruptly. Adrian heard movement, whispers, then silence. Something was wrong. The next morning, during breakfast, Adrian learned what had happened. An inmate named Chen, a quiet man in his 50s who rarely spoke to anyone, had received news that his mother had died. She lived in rural China, and Chen hadn't seen her in 6 years, since before his incarceration for embezzlement. The letter from his sister had arrived yesterday. The funeral was tomorrow. Chen would not be allowed to attend. Adrian watched Chen during breakfast. The man sat alone, not eating, staring at nothing. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table. No one approached him. No one offered comfort. In prison, grief was private, dangerous to show, easily exploited. Adrian thought about his own mother. About what it would feel like to lose her and be trapped here, unable to say goodbye, unable to grieve properly. The thought made his chest tight, his eyes burn. He stood up and walked over to Chen's table. "Whn Bao Chen," Adrian said softly in Mandarin. "I'm very sorry." Chen looked up, startled. His eyes were red, exhausted. "You speak Mandarin?" "Iding," Adrian replied. "A little. Your mother." "I heard. I'm sorry for your loss." For a moment, Chen just stared at him. Then his face crumpled, and he began speaking rapidly in Mandarin, about his mother, about his regrets, about how she had believed in his innocence until the end, about how he would never be able to thank her or apologize to her or tell her he loved her one final time. Adrian listened. He didn't try to fix anything or offer empty comfort. He just listened, understanding every word, letting Chen speak his grief in the language of his heart. When Chen finally stopped, exhausted, he looked at Adrian with something like wonder. "You understood all of that?" "Every word." "How?" Adrian smiled sadly. "I don't really know. I just can." What Adrian didn't see was the guard standing nearby, watching the entire interaction with interest. The guard's name was Officer Patricia Mills. She was 36, had worked at the prison for 11 years, and had developed a reputation for being fair but firm. She didn't tolerate violence or rule-breaking, but she also didn't treat inmates like animals. She believed in rehabilitation, which made her unusual among the staff. She had been watching Adrian for weeks, curious about the young man who seemed so out of place. She'd read his file. Wrongful conviction was a possibility. The evidence was circumstantial. His background showed no prior criminal activity. He was educated, talented, exactly the kind of person who shouldn't be here. And now she just witnessed him speak fluent Mandarin to comfort a grieving inmate. After breakfast, she approached Adrian in the hallway. "Mendez, right?" Adrian turned, immediately tense. Interactions with guards were unpredictable. "Yes, walk with me." It wasn't a request. Adrian followed her down the corridor, away from the other inmates, toward the administrative section. His heart was pounding. Had he broken some rule he didn't know about? Was this about Marcus? Officer Mills stopped in a quiet corner. "How many languages do you speak?" The question caught Adrian off guard. I'm not sure exactly. It depends on what you mean by speak. How many can you understand and communicate in right now, today? Adrian thought about it. 9. Maybe 10 if you count the ones I'm still learning. Mills studied him carefully. "And you learned most of those in the past month? Since you've been here?" It wasn't a question, but Adrian nodded anyway. "I've been working here for over a decade," Mills said slowly. "I've seen a lot of inmates, a lot of stories. But I've never seen anything like what you can do." She paused. "Are you familiar with our educational programs?" "I know they exist. I haven't really looked into them." "There's a literacy program. We help inmates work toward their GED, improve reading and writing skills, prepare for reentry into society. The program has a chronic problem. We have inmates from 30 different countries, speaking 20 different languages, and we have exactly 3 bilingual instructors. Communication is almost impossible for about 40% of our population." Adrian began to understand where this was going. "I want to propose something," Mills continued. "You help us with the literacy program. Translation work, helping non-English speakers, tutoring. In exchange, you get access to better resources, more library time, protection from certain political complications. And it would look very good when your case comes up for review." It was the second offer Adrian had received in 24 hours. But this one felt different. Adrian took Officer Mills up on her offer. Not just because it provided protection from Marcus's ultimatum, though that was certainly a factor, but because it gave him purpose again. Real purpose, not just passing time. The literacy program met 3 times a week in a converted storage room. When Adrian walked in for his first session, he found 12 inmates ranging from their early 20s to their 60s. Most looked skeptical, some looked desperate, all looked tired. The lead instructor, a volunteer named Mr. Harrison, was a retired English teacher in his 70s. He had been running the program for 6 years, fighting bureaucracy and apathy to keep it funded. When Officer Mills introduced Adrian as our new multilingual assistant, Harrison's face showed pure relief. "Do you have any teaching experience?" Harrison asked. "No," Adrian admitted. "But I'm good at explaining how languages work. And I'm good at listening." That first session was chaos. Adrian discovered that teaching was vastly different from learning. The inmates had different levels of English proficiency, different learning speeds, different reasons for being there. Some genuinely wanted to improve their education. Others were there because it looked good for their parole hearings. A few were clearly present just to get out of their cells for a couple of hours. But Adrian noticed something that Mr. Harrison seemed to miss. The non-English speakers weren't just struggling with vocabulary or grammar. They were struggling with a fundamental disconnect between how they thought in their native language and how English demanded they restructure those thoughts. During a break, Adrian approached a man named Rodrigo who was staring at a basic English workbook with visible frustration. "Puedo ayudarte?" Adrian asked. "Can I help you?" Rodrigo looked up, surprised. "You speak Spanish?" "Sí. What's giving you trouble?" Rodrigo pointed to a sentence exercise. Write a sentence using although. "I don't understand this word." "Although." "We don't have this word in Spanish. How do I use it?" Adrian sat down next to him. "In Spanish, you might say aunque estaba cansado, siguió trabajando, right?" Although he was tired, he kept working. It's the same structure. Although is like aunque. Rodrigo's face cleared. "Oh. So it's aunque. Why didn't anyone say that?" He immediately wrote down a sentence, his confidence visibly growing. Adrian realized something crucial. These men didn't need someone to just repeat English grammar rules louder and slower. They needed someone who could build bridges between their linguistic worlds. Over the next 3 weeks, Adrian transformed the literacy program in ways no one expected. He created a system. For each new English concept, Adrian would explain it in the student's native language first, then show how to translate that understanding into English. He made comparison charts, Spanish grammar structures next to English ones, Mandarin sentence patterns compared to English syntax, Arabic verb conjugations mapped onto English tenses. Mr. Harrison was amazed. "Where did you learn pedagogical theory?" "I didn't," Adrian said honestly. "I just remember how confusing it was when I first learned different languages, and I'm trying to make it less confusing for them." The program grew. Word spread through the prison that the literacy class actually worked now, that the young kid with the gift could help you actually understand English instead of just memorizing nonsense. Attendance doubled, then tripled. Officer Mills had to request a larger room. But growth brought attention. And not all of it was positive. Marcus hadn't forgotten about Adrian. The young man had sidestepped his ultimatum by aligning with the administration, which was smart but also problematic. Marcus couldn't directly challenge an inmate who was now officially part of a prison program under Officer Mills's protection. But he could apply pressure in other ways. It started small. Inmates who attended Adrian's classes would find their belongings misplaced. Study materials would go missing. Subtle intimidation, nothing provable, just enough to make people uncomfortable. Adrian noticed the attendance starting to drop. When he asked why, no one would give him a straight answer. They'd just mumble excuses and avoid eye contact. Kai was more honest. "Marcus is pissed, man. You're messing with his business model. People who learn English don't need his translators anymore. They can read their own legal documents, write their own letters. You're giving people independence, and that's dangerous to him." "So what do I do?" Kai shook his head. "I don't know, man. But be careful. Marcus plays the long game." The confrontation came sooner than Adrian expected. It happened during a Wednesday afternoon session. Adrian was helping a Vietnamese inmate named Ton understand the difference between past and present perfect tenses, which even native English speakers found confusing, when Marcus walked into the classroom. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't enrolled in the program. But he walked in anyway, confident, flanked by 2 other men. Mr. Harrison started to object, but Marcus raised a hand politely. "Just here to observe, Mr. Harrison. Thinking about joining the program myself. That okay?" What could Harrison say? Refusing would create a scene. Of course. Take a seat. Marcus sat in the back, arms crossed, watching. His presence changed the entire energy of the room. The inmates became nervous, distracted. Adrian tried to continue the lesson, but he could feel Marcus's eyes on him, assessing, calculating. After 20 minutes, Marcus raised his hand like a student. I have a question. Adrian turned to him, keeping his voice steady. Sure. You're helping all these guys learn English for free, right? Just out of the goodness of your heart. It's part of the program. We're all here to learn. Right. Noble. Marcus smiled. But here's what I don't understand. Out there, he gestured vaguely toward the world beyond the prison. Teachers get paid. Translators get paid. Tutors get paid. But in here, you're doing it for nothing. Why? It was a trap, Adrian knew. Any answer could be twisted. Because helping people is the right thing to do. The right thing, Marcus repeated, nodding slowly. Interesting philosophy. So if someone needs help with something else, say, understanding what the guards are saying about them, or reading a legal document they're not supposed to have, you'd help with that too? Because it's the right thing. The room went silent. Mr. Harrison started to intervene, but Adrian spoke first. I help people learn English so they can be independent. So they don't need to rely on anyone, including me, to understand what's happening in their own lives. That's different from helping people break rules or get around the system. Marcus stood up slowly. You know what I think, Adrian? I think you're smart enough to understand how things work in here, but you're playing innocent because it benefits you. You're protected by the administration, you look good to the parole board, and meanwhile you're disrupting systems that have been working for years. All while pretending you're just a nice guy who wants to help. He walked toward the front of the room, and Adrian had to fight the urge to step back. I'm going to make you an offer one more time, Marcus said quietly, loud enough for only Adrian and the few nearest inmates to hear. Work with me, or watch this program disappear. Your choice. He walked out before Adrian could respond. That night, Adrian received a visitor who would reveal something that changed everything. Officer Mills came to Adrian's cell after lights out, which was highly irregular. Through the small window in the door, she spoke quietly. Mendez, we need to talk. But not here. Tomorrow morning, you're being transferred to administrative segregation for 24 hours. Officially, it's for your protection due to a credible threat. Unofficially, it's because I need to show you something that could help your case. What kind of something? Security footage. From the night you were arrested. Adrian's heart stopped. I thought they reviewed all of that during my trial. They reviewed what the police submitted. But I did some digging, called in favors with city records, requested archived footage from neighboring buildings. There's camera coverage they never checked. And Adrian. Her voice dropped even lower. You need to see what's on it. Why are you helping me? Mills was quiet for a moment. Because I've been doing this job for 11 years, and I can tell the difference between someone who belongs here and someone who got screwed by bad luck and lazy police work. And because what you're doing with that literacy program, that's real rehabilitation. That's the point of this whole system, even though most people forgot that a long time ago. She stepped back from the door. Get some sleep. Tomorrow could change your life. But Adrian couldn't sleep. Because if the footage proved his innocence, what did that mean for the past 3 months? What did it mean for the people he'd met, the skills he'd developed, the person he'd become? The administrative segregation cell was cleaner and quieter than Adrian's regular housing. It felt less like punishment and more like a strange hotel room, sparse, institutional, isolated. Officer Mills arrived mid-morning with a laptop and a determined expression. "Before I show you this," she said, setting up the computer, "you need to understand something. This footage doesn't automatically overturn your conviction. But it creates reasonable doubt, and that's enough to request a case review. The problem is, once we submit this, it becomes official. People will ask questions about why it wasn't discovered before. It could get messy." "I don't care about messy. I care about the truth." Mills nodded and turned the laptop screen toward him. "This is from a traffic camera at the intersection, 1 block from where you were arrested. The timestamp is 9:47 p.m. That's 14 minutes before the police stopped you." She pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Adrian could see himself walking down the sidewalk, headphones in, completely unaware of anything happening around him. The timestamp ticked forward, 9:48, 9:49, 9:50. At 9:51, a figure appeared from an alley, the same alley where the gun was later found. The figure was wearing a dark hoodie, moving quickly but not running. In their right hand, clearly visible for 3 seconds, was a gun. The figure looked around, saw no one, and dropped something near the alley entrance. Then they continued walking in the opposite direction from Adrian, disappearing around a corner. At 9:53, Adrian walked past that exact spot, still absorbed in his podcast, completely oblivious. Mills paused the video. "That gun they arrested you with? Someone ditched it there less than 2 minutes before you walked by. You were just the first person the police saw after they started searching the area." Adrian couldn't speak. 3 months. 3 months of his life, his freedom, his future, because he happened to walk past the wrong alley at the wrong time. Did they identify the person who dropped it? "That's the complicated part," Mills said. "I showed this to a detective I trust. The figure's face isn't clear enough for a positive ID, but the gait analysis and body type match someone who was already a suspect in the original investigation. Someone they eliminated too quickly because they found you instead. So I was convenient." "You were easy," Mills corrected gently. "Young, no criminal record, no strong alibi, no lawyer who pushed back hard enough. The system is supposed to find the truth, but sometimes it just finds the path of least resistance." Adrian felt something building in his chest: anger, relief, vindication, grief for lost time. All of it churning together into something overwhelming. What happens now? "Now, we file for case review. I submit this footage officially. Your public defender, or hopefully a better lawyer, argues for dismissal based on new evidence. If it works, you could be out within weeks." Weeks. Not months. Not years. Weeks. But something was bothering Adrian, something he couldn't quite articulate. That night, back in his regular cell, Adrian couldn't stop thinking. Freedom was within reach, actual, legitimate, legal freedom. Everything he'd lost could be restored: his scholarship, his research, his life. But what about the literacy program? What about the 30 inmates who were finally starting to understand English, finally gaining independence? What about Chen, who told him yesterday that he'd been able to read his daughter's letter without asking for help for the first time? What about Rodrigo, who was studying for his GED exam? What about the strange, unexpected purpose he'd found in this awful place? Dimitri's voice came through the vent around midnight. "You're thinking too loud, Adrian." "How can you tell?" "I can hear you pacing. What's going on?" Adrian hesitated, then told him everything: the footage, the case review, the possibility of getting out. Dimitri was quiet for a long moment. "That's wonderful news. So why do you sound conflicted? I don't know. I should be happy. I am happy. But you found something meaningful here, and you're afraid that leaving means abandoning it. That sounds stupid when you say it out loud. It's not stupid, Dimitri said gently. It's human. You took something terrible and found a way to make it matter. That's rare. But Adrian, listen to me. You can't sacrifice your freedom out of guilt. Those men in your program, they're not your responsibility. The system failed them, just like it failed you. You getting out doesn't undo the good you did. It proves that good people can survive bad situations. But the program will continue or it won't. Mr. Harrison was running it before you. He'll keep running it after. Maybe Officer Mills will find another multilingual volunteer. Maybe not. But that's not your burden to carry. Adrian knew Dimitri was right. But knowledge didn't make the feeling go away. The next morning, Adrian made a decision that surprised everyone. Adrian requested a meeting with Marcus. Officer Mills thought it was a terrible idea. Kai thought he'd lost his mind. Even Mr. Harrison expressed concern. But Adrian insisted. They met in the yard during recreation time, technically in public view but far enough from others to talk privately. Marcus arrived with his usual confidence, but there was something wary in his eyes. You wanted to talk. I'm listening. Adrian took a breath. You were right about something. I've been disrupting the system without understanding the consequences. I walked in here thinking I could just help people and that would be enough, but I didn't realize I was stepping on established structures. Marcus raised an eyebrow. So you're saying you want to work for me now? No. I'm saying I understand why you saw me as a problem. And I'm saying that I might not be here much longer anyway. He explained about the footage, the case review, the probability that his conviction would be overturned. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Adrian finished, Marcus laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh. So you're giving me a heads up that your competition is about to leave? That's either very naive or very strategic. It's neither. It's just honest. Adrian met his eyes. You run your network however you want. That's not my business. But the literacy program, that's different. Those guys aren't trying to compete with you or undermine you. They're just trying to survive in here with some dignity. If I leave, I'm asking you to let the program continue without interference. Why would I do that? Because some of your own people attend. Because having inmates who can read their own legal documents and write their own letters actually makes your life easier in the long run. You don't have to provide those services. And because... Adrian paused, choosing his words carefully. Because you've survived in here by being smart, not just by being ruthless. And smart means knowing when something isn't actually a threat to you. Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. You've got guts, Adrian. Stupid, naive guts, but guts. The program can keep running. But if you're wrong, if you don't get out, then we revisit our previous conversation. Adrian shook his hand. Fair enough. 3 weeks later, Adrian stood in front of a judge for the second time. The courtroom was different this time. His mother was there, his sister, even his former academic advisor from the university. A real lawyer, not the overwhelmed public defender, stood beside him. The courtroom was different this time. His mother was there, his sister, even his former academic advisor. A real lawyer stood beside him, presenting the security footage and timeline discrepancies. The prosecutor argued the evidence was circumstantial. But the judge watched the footage 3 times, asking pointed questions about why this angle hadn't been checked initially. After 2 hours, she made her ruling. Mr. Mendez, the evidence presented creates more than reasonable doubt. The original investigation was inadequate. Your conviction is hereby overturned. You are free to go, effective immediately." His mother sobbed. His sister screamed with joy. Adrian stood frozen, unable to process the words. Free. He was free. Processing out took 4 hours. Officer Mills walked him through each step. "What will you do now?" she asked at the final gate. "Restart my research. Maybe look into prison education programs. From the outside this time." She handed him a folder. Letters from the inmates. Inside were dozens of notes. "Thank you for teaching me. Now I can read to my son. Rodrigo, you showed me my mind still works. Good luck, brother. Dimitri, you gave me back my voice. Chen, make us proud. Man." Kai Adrian's eyes burned as he closed the folder. The final gate opened. Sunlight poured in, brighter than he remembered. His mother waited beyond the fence, tears streaming. Adrian stepped through and into her arms. The metal doors closed behind him with a final clang. But this wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand.